What is up, everyone? I'm Ben McDonnell, and this is It's Been a Week. This season, we're going deeper into the stories that really stick with you. I'm having unfiltered conversations with guests from friends to celebrities and maybe a few unexpected guests. But don't worry, I'm going to mix in a few solo episodes where I unpack relationships, identities, career chaos, and whatever the hell just happened this week. If you like your comedy smart, if you like real conversations, and you like things that are unhinged just enough where you can relate, then you're in the right place. New episodes are out every Tuesday. This is It's Been a Week.
Support for This News is So Gay comes from the LGBTQ Plus Opportunity Fund of the Cleveland Foundation, leveraging philanthropy to empower LGBTQ plus communities. Welcome to This News is So Gay. I'm your host, Ken Schneck, editor of The Buckeye Flame, Ohio's LGBTQ plus newsroom. Thanks so much for joining us. Here's what we've got coming up on this week's episode. The intersections of ICE and HIV care. What is going on there that you all need to know? Tons and tons of LGBTQ plus folks marching for healthcare access. Where did that go down, and what can we learn from that mobilization? Queer love. What stories do we have for you this week about queer love? And of course, queer joy. Where is our roundtable finding queer joy in the news right now? Joining us this week to answer those questions and so many more. They've been here together. We had to bring them back together for the first time, though, in 2026. Investigative journalist and lead designer at Uncloseted Media, an investigative media company providing you with objective, nonpartisan, rigorous, original journalism that examines America's anti-LGBTQ plus landscape and elevates everyday American heroes. Sam Donndelinger. Sam, welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Ken. Thank you so much for having me back. Excited to be here.
It's exciting to have you back. And senior director, I assume still senior director, though every time he's on, it's a new title. Senior director of local news for the U.S. South for GLAAD, the nonprofit organization focused on LGBTQ plus advocacy and cultural change. Darian Aaron. Darian, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Ken. It's such a pleasure to be back with you and Sam. Third time's a charm, right?
I love it. Now, on last week's episode, Darian, we did have Sarah Kate Ellis. I think it was a job interview. I think I work there now, so it's great to be colleagues in that work.
Well, you know what? There's always room for one more gay at GLAAD. Welcome.
I love it. I still haven't heard about benefits yet, but we will find that out off the air. Our LGBTQ plus reporters roundtable is now assembled, so let's dive in. Sam, we have to start with a piece that you helped write on the intersection of ICE and HIV care, which I had thought about none before I read your piece. What did you discover in putting that piece together?
Yeah, thanks so much, Ken. We did not know where it was going to go when we started reporting. So we began just with general healthcare disruptions in Minneapolis during ICE presence. And after speaking with clinics, we saw HIV access was a major point of contention for folks. So in some ways, it makes sense because when ICE has a visible presence in a community, it creates kind of a lockdown effect. So people stop leaving homes, and not just undocumented people, but even citizens, if they fit the profile that ICE is targeting. And so for Latino communities, they are already disproportionately affected by HIV. So Latinos were 72% more likely than the general US population to be diagnosed with HIV as of 2023. So this is a community that was already facing structural barriers like stigma, language barriers, mistrust, underrepresentation in care, and then ICE presence really intensifies all of it. And what really struck me was how fragile and important the continuity of HIV care, HIV prevention, and treatment work best when they're steady and people need regular appointments, regular medication, and trust in providers. And so what we were seeing in Minneapolis is the disruptions affected care almost immediately. So the Aliveness Project was one clinic we worked closely with, and said they saw more than a 50% drop in new clients the first week that ICE began the occupation, and it only increased from there. They were seeing 100 less clients walk through their doors every week that ICE stayed in Minneapolis. And so that's a very scary thing to mess with, HIV care. And HIV is a very smart virus, so it can mutate very easily. And we don't want to be playing with inconsistent medications and preventions because it can create new strains and medical adherence. So this piece examined all those things and also what folks and providers can do when ICE does show up in their towns.
Oof, awareness. More awareness, always a good thing, which actually brings us to talking about awareness. We want to highlight here, Darian, HIV is not a crime awareness day, which, yes, it was on February 28th, and we are a little past that now, but it likely should be every day. GLAAD made sure to devote attention to HIV is not a crime awareness day. Why is this something that more folks should know about?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Ken. As you mentioned, HIV is not a crime awareness day was this past February, but it was actually founded in 2022. The Zero Project started it alongside the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation, and the day amplifies the experiences of people impacted by HIV criminalization laws. Now, Ken, your audience should know that in more than 30 states, failing to disclose an HIV diagnosis before sex can have severe consequences. Charges often escalate or penalties increase even when there is no transmission. This results in criminal prosecution, incarceration, and sometimes placement on the sex offender registry. We've seen this happen recently in Pensacola, Florida, with police officer Pierre Cotton, who was arrested for failing to disclose his HIV status to his female partner before engaging in sex. It's also worth noting that Pierre was reportedly on antiretroviral drugs and was undetectable. So HIV criminalization laws are basically an outdated throwback to the early days of the HIV epidemic, where stigma, homophobia, and AIDS hysteria fueled public policy. Even more so, these laws have failed to keep pace with scientific advancements since they were enacted. Once a death sentence, HIV is now a chronic manageable condition. With proper treatment, the virus is suppressed to undetectable, making it untransmittable. That's the key message of the U equals U campaign. Prevention medications like PrEP protect HIV negative partners from the virus. These are life saving, life changing advances, and the law should reflect policy to protect public health, not fuel stigma about HIV and people living with it. I interviewed HIV advocate Robert Suttle, who was prosecuted and served jail time in Louisiana under their HIV criminalization law. This was for a story on the GLAAD website last year. And Robert told me that there's a false assumption that people living with HIV are intentionally wanting to transmit the virus to other people. He also said it's a misconception grounded in fear and stigma against certain groups of people based on how they identify. So at what point do we say that these laws were never legitimate? They never had any intent beyond fear and prejudice during the early days of the epidemic.
I'm obsessed with this topic. So here in Ohio, we have 6 of those laws. We did a piece about a year and change ago. It's actually getting on 2 years ago with the Buckeye Flame partnered with the Marshall Project on a 22-year-old Black trans male who had oral sex with another individual, and there was a difference of opinion on whether or not his HIV status was shared. But yes, there was no transmission because there's zero chance of transmission with this sex act. And the judge sentenced him to a year in prison here and added on, I think it was an extra month because the judge didn't like what he was wearing, what he wore to his sentencing. But it is just the most remarkable. These aren't just 6 archaic laws on the books. They are actually being used, and they're disproportionately being used against Black Ohioans. So, yes, I do think that every day should probably be HIV is not a crime awareness day, but thank you for bringing that to the fore. But yeah, a year of your life in prison for an act that not only didn't transmit HIV, but couldn't transmit HIV. I think one of the laws here is using a sex toy on someone else without disclosing your HIV status. Literally, we're not talking about negligible risk. It's zero. There's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, exactly. In the state of Georgia, if you're arrested and you happen to spit on a police officer, that's jail time for you. And we know it's essentially zero risk in doing so. It's disrespectful, but there's zero risk of transmitting the virus.
Okay. We got more work to do. We got more work to do. Thank you both for that. We do want to keep talking about health stories because there were a bunch of health stories that you both were pretty darn involved in. And Darian, let's keep going with you here. LGBTQ plus Georgians right there in your state mobilized and rallied for healthcare access. What went down? And were you there? Did you go?
Yes, I was there, Ken. I actually covered this for GLAAD, and it was an incredible, incredible day. Conservatives in the Georgia legislature continue to propose harmful anti-LGBTQ legislation. LGBTQ Georgians continue to flex their political power and influence by turning up at the Gold Dome for the annual Pride to the Capitol. Now, this rally is organized by Georgia Equality, the Human Rights Campaign, and over 35 other nonprofits who mobilize equality groups from across the state to help everyday citizens meet with their lawmakers to share their stories. The rally preceded talks with lawmakers before concluding with a press conference inside the Capitol Rotunda. Now, there are currently two anti-LGBTQ bills making their way through the State House, but House Bill 54 is being closely watched by Georgia Equality. This bill would expand the current state ban on necessary health care for trans people to include a ban on puberty blockers and restrict funds to be used for health benefits that include coverage for necessary health care for trans people. Now, all of this despite the support from every major medical association in support of necessary health care for trans folks. I interviewed Peter Nunn, who's a local LGBTQ advocate who was at the rally for the piece that I published on our website. And he had one question for lawmakers that I thought was quite interesting. And he simply said, "Why are you so obsessed with us?"
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a question that deserves an answer. Kim, the truth is, healthcare access for many trans people in states like Georgia and across the South remains out of reach. And LGBTQ centers in places like Savannah have had to expand their services to offer healthcare to a growing LGBTQ population that's being underserved or completely ignored by healthcare providers. GLAAD has worked with Michael Bell, who is executive director of the Savannah Pride Center, on several story placements about what's happening in Savannah. And Michael also spoke during the Pride to the Capitol press conference, and he offered a very human perspective on necessary health care for trans people. Michael said that there are few things more powerful than watching someone finally receive hormone therapy after years of waiting. He also said necessary health care for trans people is about dignity, it's about health, and it's about giving people the chance to live fully in their own bodies. Even with anti-LGBTQ bills aiming to restrict freedom and liberty for LGBTQ Georgians, SB 195 offers some good news. It will now let pharmacies dispense PrEP. Now, this is passed in the House, so it still needs to pass in the Senate, but that is a bit of good news.
We'll take good news. We'll take good news. Sam, ketamine. I know basically nothing about ketamine. I knew basically nothing about all the things that you write about that we're talking about this week, Sam. So I just learned so much. But you learned a ton, not only about ketamine, but ketamine and its connection to LGBTQ plus mental health treatment. Talk to us about that.
Yes. Ken, you need to come to Brooklyn and hang out in the Gen Z queer parties if you want to hear more about ketamine.
I cannot tell you how quickly that's not going to happen. But yes, tell us more, Sam.
Yes. So you usually hear about ketamine in a party setting or some sort of DJ disco setting. But I began to hear it popping up in a therapeutic setting as well because it's a dissociative drug, which means it can be really good for depression or overcoming trauma. But what we're noticing happening is ketamine therapy is popping up more quickly than regulations and monitoring can keep up with it. So what's happening is gay men in particular are being exposed to it in party scenes, getting hooked on the dissociative effects, and then they have a ton of access because there are thousands of ketamine clinics across the US, and you can order it on apps, you can order it online through text drug dealers. So it's kind of this intersection of the party scene and then also the therapy scene with a lot of limited regulation. And we know LGBTQ folks are at higher risk of experiencing trauma, and they're also at higher risk of addiction. So, when given this drug so freely with the access and not the regulation in place, we're seeing a lot of high addiction rates to ketamine for gay men. So, it's being used in mental health care, but also without the regulation, making it really dangerous and really addictive to the community.
Whew. I'm still on the part where I got invited to a Gen Z party in Brooklyn, which, Darian, just pick me up on the way to the Gen Z party in Brooklyn.
Yeah, like you, I won't be going to that party either.
Open invite, open invite.
I want to say one day, but no, it's just not true. And I will not lie on this show. So thank you both. That's so much public health stuff to talk about. Well, Valentine's Day is long past, but that doesn't mean we can't still talk about queer love. We should talk about it every day. We should always be talking about queer love. Darian, you told us about this back in December, this campaign, GLAAD, I Found You. You teased it in December, and then you wrote 4 different profiles of couples. Tell us about how that campaign went.
I would love to. Actually, Ken, I wrote 5
What?
profiles. Yeah, 5 stories, 10 people, each finding love. And there's nothing that I love more than amplifying stories of queer love. I've been telling these stories for years, even before joining GLAAD. And with attacks on marriage equality at the state and national levels, it is more important now than ever before to celebrate LGBTQ love. And GLAAD I Found You couldn't be more timely and necessary, especially during a time when national opponents and even Supreme Court justices are signaling they want to overturn marriage equality. We began the campaign with the intention of concluding it on Valentine's Day, but it will continue to remind our opponents that the sky did not fall 11 years ago when marriage equality became law, and that our unions are just as legitimate and worthy of protection as theirs. And for LGBTQ folks, I hope it's a reminder of what's possible for all of us if we want it.
I would like to interrupt this episode to bring a correction. Indeed, there were 5. It's just that your feed was interrupted by your piece on the Upshaws. So that's technically not my fault. I didn't go down far enough. It was totally my fault. Can you tell me, Darian, how doing these profiles affected you?
Oh, that's a really great question. As someone who recently got married and who believes in queer love and has been amplifying queer love for years, it was just a privilege. It was an honor and a privilege to tell these stories and to provide representation, specifically for folks who look like me, other Black queer people who don't often get to see themselves reflected in media. And to tell you the truth, as a Black queer person in love, married to another Black queer person, we don't always have that representation in media either. And so for me to be able to provide that for folks, it was truly an honor.
Well, Sam, you also teased this topic back in December. That topic is polyamory. Tell us all about what you learned about polyamory and legal protections, or perhaps lack of legal protections around polyamory.
Yes, thank you, Ken. Well, what I learned from the story is polyamory is a lot more common than people think. I find a lot of my sources on dating apps, which it may be irregular for some journalists, but I had so many people wanting to speak about their experience being poly and facing discrimination or essentially just not getting the legal protections and respect that other communities have. So even though it is very common, it's legally treated like it barely exists. And the big gap that polyamorous people generally don't have is clear protections against discrimination in housing and employment. And they're also often excluded from basic family rights like hospital access, medical decision making, or recognition during a partner's death. So I spoke with folks who said they were pushed out at work after coming out as poly, others who couldn't rent housing together because the law treated them as unrelated adults living together rather than a family. And one man told me that after his partner of 24 years died, he had no legal standing in the end of life care decisions for her. And he had to basically go through her sisters in order to get the decisions made that he felt best suited their relationship. So the takeaway for me is that polyamory's biggest legal problem is not that they're banned outright, but that it's invisible. And when the law doesn't recognize your family, it makes it easier for others to dismiss that too. And it makes it almost feel invalidated, even though these people knew that they were living with family and for them it was so real. And yeah, all they're really asking is for the law to recognize it as well.
Ever since you said that thing a few months ago about how sidewalks don't
Mhm.
accommodate polyamorous relationships, I have not shut up about that to everyone. I'm like, well, who would you choose then if someone had to walk behind? So that's just even things like that to operationalize it, just stuff we're just not talking about as much. Although I have to imagine that they're talking about this at Gen Z parties in Brooklyn.
Of course, yes, of course. At all the Gen Z parties, yeah. We have huge sidewalks there, don't worry.
That would be amazing if that's how Brooklyn is marketing itself. So we're going to keep our eyes on that. But for right now, folks, you are listening to This News is So Gay. I'm your host, Ken Schneck from the Buckeye Flame, Ohio's LGBTQ plus newsroom. Joining me this week, Sam Donndelinger from Uncloseted Media and Darian Aaron from GLAAD. By the by, folks, if you are not subscribed to This News is So Gay, what on earth are you waiting for? Subscribe to This News is So Gay right this very second on your favorite podcasting app so that new episodes automatically make their way to you. And we do have a Facebook page that's just for This News is So Gay, and it's been exploding lately. So if folks want to hang out with us over on Facebook at This News is So Gay, come join us there. Well, it is time, folks. It is time for Glitter Bomb. This is where our roundtable shares stories of queer joy that they are seeing covered out there in the news. So let's set off a glitter bomb. Sam, let's start with you. Give us a story of queer joy that we might not know about that you saw out there.
Yeah, one story I think folks should know about is the Real Housewives stars came together and went to Capitol Hill to advocate for HIV prevention and treatment. And I think this is such a great example of showing exposure and community and also a bit of urgency too. Like if all these communities are getting involved and thinking that HIV care is being threatened, I think it calls other folks, people who are maybe not involved in LGBTQ rights, but who watch The Real Housewives to come together and realize that this needs attention. So I was really excited to see people showing up for that event.
Darian loved that story. I know that for a fact.
Yes.
Yeah, I absolutely did. Very important story. It's always great when we can have our allies in media come out for such a great cause and, bring attention and awareness to HIV. But my pick is a really great story that was actually published by a student journalist at Morehouse College in the Maroon Tiger. And it kind of picks up where we left off with the Glad I Found You campaign. And the piece is titled Love in Full Color. Queer AUC couples redefine representation and visibility. And this piece is all about queer couples in the AUC, the Atlanta University Center, that's comprised of Morehouse College, Spelman College, and Clark Atlanta University. And it's a profile on 3 couples, 2 lesbian couples, 1 gay couple, and how they're navigating life on campus as out queer students. And it's just masterfully written by Miles Champion, a student, journalism major, I believe. I could be wrong, but he's a very talented writer. And I actually got an opportunity to meet him last week when I was on campus for the Generation Z and HIV HBCU tour. And just so impressed with him and the work that they're doing. And to think that a few years ago, there was a lot of controversy at Morehouse behind this Vibe article that was titled The Mean Girls of Morehouse, if you remember that. So compare and contrast, they've come a long way on campus.
I was going to ask you, how was the HBCU tour?
It was absolutely incredible. It was our 3rd stop on the tour. Of course, it kicked off last October at Jackson State. Then we went to my alma mater, Alabama State University, in February, and then Morehouse last week. It continues to exceed expectations and such a great turnout, and people just find it really necessary. And that makes me feel great.
Amazing. Well, finally, it is the 45th anniversary of one of my heroes, Billie Jean King's coming out. She became the first out active pro athlete in 1981 with her ridiculously brave declaration to the world. So for this week's quick queer culture question, whose coming out affected you deeply? Darian Aaron, Give us a coming out.
I have a three-part answer to this question. I thought long and hard about it. Everybody knows Ellen DeGeneres' coming out was like a watershed moment for our community and for gay representation in media. But there were two other moments, and it's not an individual, but art, kind of an individual, because Janet Jackson's Velvet Rope album that came out in 97 was the first time that I can remember a major pop star other than Madonna, but I always saw it for Janet and not so much for Madonna. It was the first time a major pop star and ally really came out in support of the queer community when it was not popular. So that album was life changing for me. And then also queer representation on stage and Rent. Anybody remembers when that opened in
Mm.
96, seeing two queer men kiss on stage for the first time, that was like earth shattering for me.
Let me tell you, as someone who was at NYU at the time, you could not walk past an NYU dorm room that year without hearing Rent. It was not allowed. You would have been kicked out of NYU, and we would go like every other weekend. I think the problematic part was where we convinced ourselves that it was really about us. It 100% was not about us there at NYU, but I
Mhm.
can't really convey to folks how zeitgeist that was at the time. Thank you I'm going to be in that space now for the next couple hours. Sam, give us a coming out that affected you deeply.
Yeah, for me, it's also about art and music. When I first heard Chappell Roan's album and the song Casual, especially, I feel like I was talking to some of my queer friends about it, and I was like, she never says that she's talking about another woman in this song, but you can just like feel that it is about another woman. And it was such a transformative experience to hear queer love just normalized on the radio and hear it mixed in with all these other heteronormative songs. And I felt just this wave of inclusivity and just being represented in all communities wash over me. And you're just driving in the car listening to the radio and you hear a queer song come on. I think Chappell Roan really just transformed the music industry for me in that way. And I love just hearing her speak about queer rights in general. And I just think she's such a strong advocate for our message and for our movements.
I remember when the Indigo Girls first started changing their lyrics. It was pretty neutral for a while, and then they started more explicitly. If folks don't know, I am a lesbian. I am the queen of Lilith Fair. This is how I was raised. But I just remember when those lyrics started changing and being so much more gay, and that was incredible. Incredible. Oh, musical moments. Well, we always want to hear what our roundtable is working on. Sam, what's coming up for you?
Yes, I'm finally finishing my story on foster care. I think I teased it last time. And it took a really long time for me to get folks to speak on record. I think because it's a mixture of federal agencies and private agencies. So understandably, people are a little bit afraid to speak right now, especially if they're LGBTQ friendly agencies. But I'm putting the finishing touches on that story. And then we're also working on a 3-part series on conversion therapy in a modern day setting leading up to the June Supreme Court decision. And so we're looking at who are the major players right now and also what does modern day conversion therapy look like now? What kind of language are people using? How are folks getting around bans? Is there stuff happening on social media, on TikTok, that sort of thing? So that will be coming out. We're thinking one story per month leading up to the decision.
Amazing. And I guess because I believe in being a community-minded LGBTQ media ecosystem, do the thing, Sam, where you shout out the podcast.
Thank you, Ken. Yes, Uncloseted Media is launching our very own podcast March 25th, and it's Uncloseted with Spencer McNaughton. We go a little bit deeper with our journalists and talk about the behind the scenes of the articles, and we also have guests come on. We have a couple adversarial interviews coming up, some deep dives on previous stories that we did, and some of our own journalists on the podcast. So yes, you can listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Folks, go tune into that. Darian Aaron, what's coming up for you at GLAAD?
Yes, sir. Sam, we're actually on the same page in terms of conversion therapy stories. I am getting ready to work on one as well, but because the South is my beat, I'm really going to be focused on conversion therapy in Black churches in the
Mm,
South because it's happening, but it's happening under another name and it's happening as ministry, but we know it's anything but. So, going to be working on that and also working on GLAAD down south. It's a media event that I've been doing annually to really share the work that we're doing in the South at GLAAD with the local media and community leaders. But this year, we're going to spread the wealth a little bit and kind of take the show on the road and do it on a smaller scale in communities throughout the South.
amazing. If I can add a third conversion therapy angle, we just published a few weeks ago here at the Buckeye Flame a list of all of the 14 or 15 municipalities here in Ohio that have banned conversion therapy. And myself and my colleague Ben Jodway, Ben really did the bulk of the work, found that in these municipalities, it's near impossible to actually enforce any of these bans. If you search on their websites, I think it was 14 of the 16 municipalities. If you searched for conversion therapy on the municipality's website, absolutely nothing came up. So it's not even like in these places where it is banned, where folks can even figure out what to do if you wanted to lodge a complaint. So much going on with conversion therapy and so much going on with the great work that you two are doing. I'm so appreciative. I will never separate you two, so you are stuck together for the life of this show. Sam Donndelinger, incredible work at Uncloseted Media. Please keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me, as always.
See you in Brooklyn. And Darian Aaron, wonderful as always.
Thank you. I try only for you, Ken.
And I appreciate it. I'm Ken Schneck, editor of the Buckeye Flame, Ohio's LGBTQ plus newsroom. And if you liked this episode of This News is So Gay, please share it with a friend. Subscribe so that you do not miss out on our next episode. Send an email on over to editor@thebuckeyeflame.com. That's me, to let us know your thoughts. And of course, rate and review us on your favorite podcasting app. This News is So Gay is a product of the Buckeye Flame, a nonprofit newsroom. Become a recurring donor today for as little as $12.50 a month. That means you get called a Firefly, and becoming a Firefly truly enables programming like this and supports our scrappy queer newsroom. In the meantime, read LGBTQ plus news, share the stories of LGBTQ plus reporters, and support the work of LGBTQ plus newsrooms. Until next week, friends.